through law. My name is John Watts, an advisor on the role of the media to the Lawfare Institute, and I'm delighted to be joining this event. I'm joining you this evening on this. As more people are joining this event now, before I introduce the panelists for today's event and hand over to our host, just a couple of housekeeping points for everyone. Firstly, this event is being recorded and will be made available after the event. The event is on the record and it is open to members of the public, as well as journalists and of course, the student, academic and alumni community of King's College, London. Now, simultaneous translation is available both in English and Portuguese by clicking on the appropriate window here on Zoom. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our translators in London and also in Sao Paulo. Now, President Lula will be joining us today by video. We have managed to have a simultaneous translation provided on that video from Sao Paulo. So if you stay in the main Zoom room channel, his remarks will be dubbed into English and then on the Portuguese translation will be available as well. For the online conversation, please use the hashtag Lawfare and please do submit your questions via the chat function, and I'll be collating the question themes and putting all of your questions, or as many questions as possible, to the panelists later in the session. So on behalf of the Lawfare Institute and all of the panelists, we would like to put on record our thanks to the King's College London team for hosting this event and all of the hard work that has gone into making this event possible. And today's webinar is a discussion around lawfare, the misuse of law for political means. And this follows a recent publication of the English version of Lawfare, Waging War Through Law. Now, whilst President Lula's case is one of the highest profile global cases, it is not alone. And today's event will be exploring other cases of lawfare internationally. So the book is published by Routledge. It's available via their website, independent bookshops, as well as an ebook, or please do put a request for a copy of the book via your university library. And I'll join you later to briefly discuss the role of the media in lawfare and by also putting questions to the panel. So please do continue to submit your questions throughout the session. Now, we are scattered all across the world this afternoon, so we are reliant, in my case, on electricity and also a stable internet connection. So do bear with us if we have any connection issues. But before we cross over to Sao Paulo and to President Lula's video, I am delighted to introduce the other panelists for today. So also joining us from Sao Paulo, of course, are the three authors of the book we are discussing today. And for those who have followed Lula's case closely, two very, very recognizable international figures, Lula's lawyers, Cristiano Zanin Martins and Valesca Teixeira Zanin Martins. A very warm welcome to you to this session, and also a very warm welcome to Rafael Valim, one of the joint authors of the book, and of course, visiting professor at the University of Manchester and University Le Havre, Normandy. And in London, I'm delighted now to hand over to the host for today's event and the person who made this event possible. Alfredo Saad Filho is Professor of Political Economy and International Development and Head of the International Development Department at King's College London. Alfredo has followed the issue of lawfare very closely and indeed was instrumental at the international launch of the Lawfare Institute in London in December 2012. So enough from me. Thank you very much for joining, and Alfredo, over to you.
Thank you, John. I'd like to welcome our speakers and welcome all our guests to King's College London. The college is honored to host the launch of this very important book on lawfare. We have here with us the authors, and they'll tell us about their book and the problems that the book addresses. What is lawfare? Why does it matter, and what are its implications for democracy? They'll also tell us about their engagement with specific instances of lawfare, in particular, as John mentioned, the case of former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Now, for context, lawfare is the misuse of law for political ends, aiming to destroy someone under the appearance of upholding the law, often with support from the mainstream media and from powerful sections of the elite. The idea is to entangle the target into endless legal procedures for fabricated reasons, bankrupt them as they try to defend themselves, harm them and their families through adverse media coverage, constrain their legal representatives, and much more. And this is done to the point where the target loses support and loses legitimacy. They become unable to put their case forward. They are then presumed guilty, regardless of the lack of evidence. They are almost always destroyed politically. They often end up in jail. Now, lawfare is becoming increasingly common as part of a political crisis that has been degrading democracy and respect for human rights around the world. And this book that we're launching today is the most scholarly and the most authoritative source on lawfare today. The authors have got not just academic knowledge, they have also got experience as they led the defense of the most prominent victim of lawfare today, that's former President Lula. They worked tirelessly for years. They faced a gigantic conspiracy led by the US government and elite groups in Brazil, trying to frame Lula and make him spend the rest of his days in jail. They faced the most terrible intimidation, arbitrariness, illegal behavior, brutal behavior, bordering on dictatorship. But all of this appearing to comply with the law and with total support from the media. Our authors won, and Lula won. And after years of incredible suffering and fortitude, with terrible personal losses and pain, Lula is now free, and his innocence is recognized. Our authors, they're not just scholars, they are also heroes of democracy. And we are privileged to hear from them and to hear a message from former President Lula, who will be speaking from his house in Sao Paulo. Lula needs no introduction. The whole world knows him. I'll just point out three things. First, Lula was president of Brazil for 8 years between 2003 and 2010, and he'd finished his administration leading a successful country and by far being the most popular politician in modern Brazilian history. Second, Lula has shown throughout this terrible process he has been through, he has shown huge personal bravery. He confronted the right-wing forces that were unleashed against him very, very courageously. Most people would have quit. Lula never did. He fought every step of the way, all the way back to freedom. And third, Lula has shown time and again that he is the greatest political leader in the world today, the greatest political leader of our generation. No politician in the world today compares with Lula in terms of strength of character, mass appeal, capacity for dialogue, and personal leadership. And these qualities are now desperately needed and immensely important for his country that is living through unspeakable tragedies. And in the face of those horrors, Lula today, he embodies the hopes of a people. So it is a privilege for us to hear a special message from President Lula, and it is an honor to welcome Valesca, Cristiano, and Rafael. You are incredible people. Thank you so much. And we'll now hear a message from President Lula.
Meus amigos, my dear friends, today is a very special day for those that are practitioners in law, and for those that advocate for democracy, and for those that love freedom. After all, we are releasing today, under the sponsorship of King's College, a book calling Waging Warfare. This book was written by my sister, Valesca Martins, and my brothers, Cristiano Zanin, and my brother, Rafael Valim, the three Brazilian lawyers that worked a lot to build this book, to try to show the world the new sophisticated way of those that want to bypass law and what they're doing to convict people that they have political divergence or economic or ideological divergence. I'm talking about warfare. It's a concept that the book tells us the most sophisticated tentative to convict people for which you disagree politically. I believe that Valesca and Zanin and Valim did an extraordinary work, and I would enjoy if you would read this book that is being released now in its English version, because it's very important that the world understand the novelty of the political system of conviction that is called lawfare, and that happened in Brazil against a former president of the Brazil. My case, myself, you all know that I was convicted and I stayed in jail for 538 days in the most extraordinary lie ever told and built and developed by the federal police, by the prosecutor's office, by a judge, and with the complacency of the mass media, as if it was you set up a gang and at the service of foreign interests, because in my case, we had the participation and the massive participation of the Department of Justice of the United States, and also a passive participation of the prosecutors from Switzerland, contributing with the prosecutor's office in Brazil, with a Brazilian judge, so that all of them would give a base to a lie that was being told about me. So we thank God to Cristiano Zanin and to Valesca and to the publication of this book, and thanks to the dedication and competence of my lawyers, we managed to show the farce. We managed to prove the lie. And at the same time, we managed to prove my innocence. The release of this book is a new landmark in the law history around the world, I would say, and above all in Latin America and in other developing countries that have any kind of economic conflict with their companies with American companies. This is what happened in Brazil. The attempt to destroy the local domestic engineering industry in Brazil, the oil and gas Brazilian industry, and try to destroy Petrobras, the state-owned company. That is to say, all the Brazilian companies that were competitive with vis-a-vis with American companies were sued, and some of them were shut down, were bankrupt in a process that I would call it very sophisticated, that involves the media, the prosecutor's office, the federal police, and the judiciary branch of power. And thanks, and I want to repeat this, and thanks to the competence of my lawyers, of Valesca and Zanin, and thanks to the competence of the publication of this book that now you will receive an English version, is that we managed to unveil this mystery. And I believe that all the world has to get ready for this new way, sophisticated way, to sue and file judicial cases against political adversaries. We had a Brazilian case in Latin America, we had in Argentina, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in El Salvador, and we had this happening in other parts of the world, lawfare. And this book is a necessary reading so that we can learn how to fight and not to allow, nevermore, that the judiciary branch is at the service of a lie, at the service of false premises, at the service, I would say, of the destruction of the political and ideological struggle in each country. And so I'd like to thank very much all of you that are watching the release of this book. And I'd like to thank very much our speaker, Mr. Alfredo Saad Filho, who is the head of the International Department of International Development of the Department of the King's College. And I'd like to thank the brother John Watts, who is advisor at the Lawfare Institute. And I'd like to say and wish to my dear friends, good luck, my dear Valesca, good luck. My dear brother Valim, good luck to you too. And I want you all to know, and Zanin too, good luck. And I want you to know that I read your book. I'm not a lawyer, but after I read the book, I reached the conclusion that every lawyer will become much better lawyer, will become much more competent, and will earn and win more cases, and would put a lot of people more innocent more than any other previous time in the history of law. Thank you very much. Congratulations for the reach of the book, and that we can. I hope we can sell a lot of books so that many lawyers could have access and advocate for their clients with the same competence that we had for the Brazilian case. Good luck to all of you, and a great hug to all of you. Thank you.
It's absolutely wonderful to hear from President Lula, and he did present a very condensed summary of what he had to go through during his legal fight. His legal fight that was led by the authors of this book. I will now ask Valeska to introduce to us the book and the circumstances in which the book was written. Thanks very much, Valeska.
Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you all. I'd first like to thank Professor Alfredo and everybody, Alfredo Saad and everybody at King's College who made this event possible, who made who actually put in the work to make sure that this event was possible, the launching of Lawfare, Waging War Through Law. I'd like to thank John Watts as well for accepting our invitation to mediate this event. John and BLJ have always been, since the beginning of the Lula case with us back in 2016. He was always part of the Lawfare, of the discovery of Lawfare, and he worked in a major part of the communications, neutralizing the Lawfare phenomenon that we were living, and very much an essential part as well of the understanding of the phenomenon. So thank you so much for always being there with us through tough and good times, and hopefully, you know, in the future through other cases and better understanding the phenomenon of Lawfare. I'd like to thank also my two co-authors, Rafael and Cristiano. Cristiano, especially because he's my partner, and he was always there with me. Well, he's always been there with me, but suffered, worked through since the beginning of the case of Lula, suffered a lot of violence, not only professionally, but in his personal life as well. So did I. And the understanding of Lawfare came at that point where we needed to understand what was happening. It was not a complex litigation. It was not a big case, transnational case. It was not. It was something else that we could not understand what was going on. We would litigate 24/7. We would have to answer to media constantly. So we were attacked multidimensionally on an everyday basis. And that was not normal. That was not a normal case. We've been litigating for more than 20 years, and it's something that we never encountered. So we knew we were facing something new, and therefore we needed to go deeper and understand better what was happening. And that's when we started to work on Lawfare. It was as if it helped us understand the phenomenon. It helped us understand the mechanism of the day-to-day life of this incredible long procedure of the case of Lula. And it helped us navigate and understand how their strategies and techniques and how they use their strategies and techniques in multi-dimensions of war. So back in 2015, we started working and studying Lawfare, and which made us announce in October of 2016 that Lula was being a victim of lawfare. Lawfare is the conjunction of the words law and warfare, therefore lawfare. It is what Charles Dunlap called back in 2001. It is a name that needs, actually, it's such a strong name that everybody would understand the concept behind the name, the strong name. So we kept lawfare because we think this concept is very necessary for the whole world to understand. It is a legal war. It works as warfare. It works in dimensions of warfare. If you go to the basics of war, all of the biggest strategies of warfare, you're going to find the same mechanisms utilized in lawfare. The first dimension used to fight lawfare is the picking of jurisdiction, or the picking of the battlefield. So you find the best jurisdiction to try your case in. Either through the culture of the regional court, either through the administrative court that you choose. Through a lot of elements, you choose the best place to fight your battle. Second, you choose your weaponry, which is basic in all warfare. In lawfare, it could not be different. You pick the law. Which law will you fight your enemy? In Brazil, we have had electoral law, I would say, in the case of Dilma's impeachment. And now the biggest weaponry of lawfare is the corruption law, is the anti-corruption law, which has been actually has been globified, has gone global through the misuse of the FCPA and the universalization of the concept through OCDE. So the United States, basically, this is the most common form of lawfare nowadays. The FCPA uses the FISA, which is through mass surveillance and to the distribution of mass data. They hand it out to their Department of State, Department of Justice, and therefore they start the battle through these different dimensions. So these laws are the most dangerous weaponry right now because they're used for geopolitical purposes, for commercial purposes, for military purposes, and regionally for political purposes as well. So we have identified all different uses of lawfare throughout history. Bearing in mind that Lula's case was and is, and up until now, the biggest case we have read about, we have ever witnessed, the longest one by far, the most complex one by far. And the third dimension, which is, I would say, as important as the other ones, are the externalities. So how media, how social media, how they actually work as a team with parts of the judiciary, with the strategists of lawfare, in order to and actually pass on to the population the idea of culpability. So the person which is object of any first act of lawfare integrated with media is now actually a suspect of corruption. This is basically how it works around the world. And the suspect of corruption, as Jeffrey Robertson, a colleague who works with us in the United Nations, would say, the big C word is actually the one that you can never get in touch with, because if you're a suspect, your political life is over. Your chances of defending yourself in trial, in court, is over. It's basically losing popularity, losing legitimacy, losing all popular support, and you can go to jail or not. You can, file a plea bargain agreement, but your political life will never be the same. An executive from a company charged or a suspect of corruption will not never be able to find a job, a replacement, because he will always carry the burden of being suspect of corruption. And that goes for everybody in all different disciplines and all different areas of the economy. And people need to be aware that this can happen to everyone. We're talking about business owners, executives. We're talking about politicians, the most important politicians are on earth or not. It doesn't matter who you are. So we decided to launch the conceptual book in order to reach out to the global population, and not only lawyers, but also in other disciplines, so that people would understand how law is being misused today. So the strategic way of utilizing law is actually ruining democracies. This is a first study. This is, as we call, an introduction to the study of lawfare. And we propose to keep on studying, to keep on reaching out to more academic scholars everywhere in the world, so that we may somehow actually compile enough technique to fight and neutralize this violent phenomenon of lawfare, which uses the violence of the misuse of the law for illegitimate purposes. And this will attack anyone around you, your family, your lawyers. It is, as Alfredo said, it is meant to keep you from defending yourself. It is meant to bend you. It is meant to make you so weak that you want to give up. And we are here to ensure that people know that other people have gone through it, that there is a technique, that it is possible to fight it back. And that is the idea that we wanted to share with the world with this book. And we expect to keep on debating for many more years and be able to reach out and understanding on how to prevent or how to neutralize. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time for being here.
Valeska, thank you very much. Rafael, why don't we come to you?
Vamos lá. Me escutam? Are you hear me? Yeah. Boa tarde a todos. É uma satisfação participar deste evento de lançamento da edição em inglês do nosso livro. Eu agradeço, em primeiro lugar, a você, John, por exercer tão bem seu papel de mediador nesse evento, mas também pelo apoio que sempre deu aos meus colegas Cristiano e Valesca ao longo de todo esse tempo e ao longo, na verdade, de todo o tempo de existência do Lawfare Institute. Minhas palavras também são de agradecimento a esse queridíssimo amigo Alfredo Saad Filho, que faz parte da história, dessa história do Lawfare, né? Ele que nos proporcionou o espaço para o lançamento do Instituto, do Lawfare Institute, quando o Alfredo ainda estava na Universidade de Londres, e foi um incentivador e com quem nós mantivemos um diálogo constante, e também teve um papel decisivo na edição inglesa do livro. Foi o Alfredo que nos deu os caminhos, as pistas para que a gente encontrasse a editora, a Routledge, e nos deu o apoio necessário para que esse projeto se tornasse possível. Então, Alfredo, meu agradecimento e por tudo que fez por nós e por esse projeto, né, que está longe de ser um projeto pessoal, mas é um projeto de defesa da democracia, do Estado de Direito em escala global, né? O meu aporte aqui é muito breve. Eu vi aqui que tem já algumas questões chegando para nós, mas o que eu teria a sublinhar, e sem falsa modéstia, a sublinhar em termos de ineditismo desse trabalho, é essa articulação teórica entre a teoria jurídica e a teoria da guerra, né? Isso não havia sido feito ainda, né? Todos os trabalhos até então publicados sobre Lawfare, ora adotavam uma concepção que misturava o Lawfare com a própria judicialização da política, ou com o Lawfare como um instrumento de se fazer política através do judiciário, do sistema de justiça, aquela ideia de litigância estratégica, que a gente vê muito em ONGs de direitos humanos, ou tinha no Lawfare uma visão meramente instrumental, com uma feição neutra, de que o direito poderia servir como uma arma de guerra, como um substitutivo, né, como um sucedâneo das armas convencionais. E isso não nos parecia uma concepção ou que esse significado fosse aceitável do ponto de vista teórico. E Valesca e Cristiano me corrijam, mas se eu estiver enganado, mas foi esse giro conceitual que nós imprimimos ao termo Lawfare e demos a ele um caráter francamente negativo, de que o direito jamais deve ser instrumentalizado, utilizado para fins de abater um inimigo, né? A própria aceitação da figura do inimigo é algo que deve ser de imediato repugnado, deve ser repelido dentro do nosso modelo, um modelo consagrado de democracia constitucional. Então, a Valesca já nos deu aí algumas também, como nós estruturamos as dimensões do Lawfare e tudo isso, mas nós bebemos da fonte, né, Valesca? A gente ficava lá estudando os livros de teoria da guerra, de estratégia, quase ficamos malucos, né, Cris, com toda essa incursão. E aqui eu também devo registrar que o prefaciador do livro, não é mesmo, Valesca? Que é o John Comaroff, de Harvard, um grande antropólogo, e a partir de cujas ideias também nós estruturamos e desenvolvemos essas dimensões, né? O prefácio dele merece a leitura, e também a ele agradecemos pela generosidade. Então, eu posso dizer assim, a nossa teoria do Lawfare é uma teoria, no final das contas, de defesa intransigente do próprio direito, né? O direito, como diz o nosso querido professor Luigi Ferraioli, como uma instância ou como um instrumento a serviço da paz, como um instrumento que deve mediar, uma instância de mediação dos conflitos, de resolução dos conflitos, e não uma instância que se converta numa arma para a destruição de determinados sujeitos ou categorias de sujeitos que em determinado momento se mostram como indesejáveis aos titulares ou do poder, aos soberanos de turno. Então, essas são as minhas observações. Agradeço mais uma vez a todos que tornaram possível esse encontro, esse lançamento, a todos também e todas que estão aqui nos assistindo, e lhe devolvo a palavra, John.
Thank you very, very much for your remarks, Rafael. Can we move now to a man who doesn't need any introduction, who's very well known as President Lula's lawyer, represented him for many years. Cristiano, over to you.
Muito obrigado, John. Eu inicio cumprimentando o professor Alfredo Saad Filho por estar gentilmente, né, promovendo o lançamento do nosso livro na versão em inglês. Agradeço a King's College London, agradeço a você, John, por estar moderando este encontro e agradeço a todos que estão aqui nesta tarde ou nesta noite conosco, dependendo de onde as pessoas estão. Nós lançamos esse livro em 2019, aqui no Brasil. E como já dito aqui pela Valesca e pelo Rafael, esse livro ele é um livro conceitual e fruto, né, de uma atuação profissional e de estudos que nós fizemos ao longo do tempo, porque não identificamos, né, sobretudo no caso do ex-presidente Lula, que houvesse, como já foi dito, um processo normal ou uma investigação normal. Então, passamos a fazer esse questionamento e, uma vez identificado o Lawfare, nós desenvolvemos esta obra conceitual para explicar as técnicas e táticas, como o Lawfare funciona. No início, foi muito difícil, porque nós falávamos dessa guerra jurídica com táticas e técnicas próprias, e muitas pessoas pensavam que nós estávamos elucubrando ou tratando de algo que não existia. Mas, ao longo do tempo, com os nossos estudos e com a nossa atuação profissional, nós pudemos mostrar que, efetivamente, existe, não só no Brasil, mas também ao redor do mundo, o uso estratégico do direito para obtenção de fins ilegítimos, seja no campo geopolítico, seja no campo político, seja no campo comercial, seja no campo militar. Esse uso estratégico ele é palpável, ele existe, e no livro nós indicamos diversas fontes de referência para dar supedâneo a essa teoria, a esse conceito que está lançado e proposto no nosso livro. Aqui no Brasil, nós tivemos a oportunidade de nos deparar com algumas situações inusitadas. Por exemplo, por que é que promotores e juízes e delegados estavam sendo treinados por autoridades estrangeiras? Por que as autoridades estrangeiras vinham fora dos canais oficiais para promover treinamentos dessas autoridades, que são as autoridades que atuam perante o sistema de justiça? Mais ainda, nós passamos a questionar como se dava esse contato. Afinal, pelos contatos, pelos canais oficiais, eles não ocorriam. E tudo isso foi sendo alvo de uma intensa análise, de uma intensa investigação que ajudou a promover essa teoria. Não é aceitável em qualquer lugar do mundo que o direito seja usado de forma estratégica para atacar pessoas, atacar empresas, atacar instituições. Sobretudo quando esse ataque ele é conjugado como uma verdadeira campanha simultânea que busca neutralizar ou tornar aceitáveis esses ataques. Então, por exemplo, no caso do presidente Lula, nós vimos aqui acontecer, de um lado, a escolha da jurisdição favorável, de outro lado, a escolha da lei, sobretudo da lei anticorrupção, e vimos, simultaneamente, uma campanha para criar um clima artificial de culpabilidade, de forma que, antes mesmo de qualquer processo, antes mesmo de qualquer julgamento, ele já tivesse a etiqueta de culpado perante a sociedade. Então, isso aconteceu no caso do ex-presidente Lula. Vejam, um ex-presidente da República que sempre teve níveis elevadíssimos de popularidade no nosso país, e pode, evidentemente, acontecer com qualquer empresa, com qualquer instituição e com qualquer pessoa, desde que essas pessoas, empresas ou instituições passem a ser alvo desse sistema que faz o uso estratégico das leis para alcançar fins ilegítimos. Eu acho sempre importante lembrar, John, que tudo isso que nós escrevemos no livro, que foi publicado em 2019, na sua primeira edição, nós tivemos recentemente aqui no Brasil uma nova oportunidade de confirmar toda essa teoria, todo esse conceito, a partir do momento em que nós, com autorização do Supremo Tribunal Federal, conseguimos ter acesso a um arquivo de comunicação entre promotores, juízes e delegados. Isso aconteceu em janeiro deste ano, repito, com autorização do Supremo Tribunal Federal, e nesse arquivo nós pudemos encontrar conversas absolutamente descabidas e estarrecedoras que ocorriam num outro lado do biombo entre esses juízes, promotores e delegados. E essas conversas mostravam não só o conluio para o uso estratégico das leis contra alvos e inimigos pré-definidos, como também mostraram uma intensa cooperação fora dos canais oficiais entre essas autoridades brasileiras e autoridades estrangeiras, sobretudo autoridades norte-americanas e também autoridades suíças. Ora, esse arquivo, esses fatos, são a prova cabal de que, efetivamente, existe uma organização de âmbito mundial que busca viabilizar, treinar e aplicar as leis nos mais diferentes países para obter fins ilegítimos, para alcançar resultados que não seriam alcançados se o direito fosse utilizado de forma correta, se nós tivéssemos o devido processo legal sendo aplicado. Então, essa situação como um todo, ela coloca em xeque tanto o sistema de justiça de cada país, afinal de contas, você não está fazendo justiça, mas sim promovendo um uso estratégico do direito, o que é inaceitável, sobretudo para alcançar fins ilegítimos, e também você acaba corroendo a própria democracia desses países. Aqui no Brasil, e no caso do presidente Lula, não só ele foi processado, condenado e foi encarcerado por 580 dias com base numa farsa jurídica, como também ele foi retirado das eleições presidenciais de 2018, alterando de forma artificial o próprio sistema democrático do nosso país. E é importante dizer que, se isso aconteceu aqui no caso do presidente Lula, nós vemos acontecer o mesmo fenômeno em diversos países atualmente, tanto da América Latina, mas também países europeus, e também nos Estados Unidos, e onde podemos identificar como uma fonte primária do Lawfare, isso também foi praticado dentro dos Estados Unidos. Nós tivemos processos conhecidos de Lawfare dentro dos Estados Unidos, inclusive um deles é expressamente citado no nosso livro, que é o caso de um senador norte-americano que foi alvejado por diversas acusações frívolas para que ele não fosse eleito, não pudesse concorrer, porque o voto dele era tido como bastante importante para a questão do Obamacare. Então, naquele caso também, naquele caso do senador Ted Stevens, também foi descoberta depois uma grande fraude através do acesso a arquivos de trocas de correspondências entre promotores daquele país. Então, no final do dia, o que nós temos aqui é um conceito que precisa ser compreendido não só pelos operadores do direito, mas também por todos aqueles que prezam pelo Estado de Direito e prezam pela democracia, porque é um instrumento importante, é um instrumento que ele acaba vindo e sendo aplicado de uma forma mascarada, que tende a acobertar essa violência e esses fins ilegítimos. Afinal de contas, nós estamos tratando de algo que acontece com o uso das leis e dentro do sistema de justiça como regra. Então, você tem uma primeira dificuldade para identificar. E uma vez identificado o fenômeno, há técnicas próprias para poder enfrentá-lo e neutralizá-lo. Essa é a proposta do nosso livro, essa experiência que nós contamos nessa obra, e esperamos que todos aqueles que tenham acesso ao livro possam compreender e bem aplicar o seu conteúdo, como eu disse aqui, não só para a defesa do devido processo do lugar em todos os países, mas também para a defesa das próprias democracias. Muito obrigado a todos.
Cristiano, thank you very, very much for your remarks. We're now going to move on to the Q&A session. We've had lots of questions in, both via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, but also on the hashtag Lawfare on Twitter and on Facebook. So please keep on putting your questions in. Before we move on to the questions, I just wanted to put a couple of additional points about the role of international media in lawfare. President Lula referred to the need in many ways of the media to back up some of the actions that is taking place with lawfare. So I'm going to make a couple of points about that and then move on to your questions. Now, the context of this is having, as Valeska pointed out, I've been part of the team for 5 years now, helping explain Lula's case to the world, working with Cristiano and Valeska in particular, but also with Jeffrey Robertson, QC, and Doughty Street Chambers here in London. One of the key aspects of Operation Car Wash is how they, i.e. the opposition, used the media to further their case. Now, it isn't unusual in any legal case to have a media operation around putting your point of view and putting the position of your case to the media. But what was very unusual in this case, and indeed other lawfare cases, which we will move on to into the Q&A, is how and why they selected certain journalists. And as Lula pointed out, lawfare cannot succeed without the support of parts of the media. So what happens broadly, what you see from a media, certainly from a media professional's perspective, is you see the creation of a development of a network of cheerleaders. Normally, they're selected from the economic right, although it is an important point to make that lawfare is not necessarily a left-right issue. This crosses all across the political spectrum. But in the cases that we've been working on and that the Lawfare Institute has looked at, it's very much been journalists, certainly from an editorial perspective, on the economic right. And the Operation Car Wash used their contacts in the international media to convince what, in my view, and what collectively our view, what otherwise very, very professional journalists, that to convince them that their means to prosecute the alleged corruption justified the misuse of the law in the first place. And once they seeded that narrative, and they seeded that narrative in a number of select, very, very well-respected, right-leaning international publications. And those publications, and also broadcast outlets, sort of bought into the support of legal activities because they believed that the legal activities were justified in the end to deal with allegations of corruption. So they were bought into the argument that you had to do this in order to deal with the issues. But what we're now seeing, and this is for me from a media management perspective that is very interesting. In Brazil, what we saw were the journalists on the ground, the day-to-day correspondents who were churning out the stories on Brazil politics, they knew something was wrong. And in the meetings and in the interviews and the briefings, they knew that there's something wasn't right. But they were struggling to get their international desks, whether they be in London, Paris, New York, Washington, to listen to their arguments. And that is, you know, if we were being sympathetic, that is because so often international desks don't give Brazil or South America the amount of time that they deserve from a news perspective. But what was clear was that in many publications, a collective editorial decision outside Brazil had already been taken that Lula was guilty, and therefore these illegal misuse of law, i.e. lawfare, was justified to deal with what they believed was guilt. Now, some of that was based on ignorance. They genuinely could not understand that Brazil really does have an unreformed medieval European law. I won't name the publication because I think someone from that very publication is on this webinar today, but I remember very clearly a conversation that lasted about 3 hours just before one Christmas, where Cristiano, Valesca and myself went through what was happening against President Lula, word for word, has been proven true and accurate. Now, this senior editor, he gave us the time to put our case, but we never, ever saw any change in their editorial stance. But more worryingly than that, I think, is when one publication, certainly a well-known publication, follows a debate and creates a debate, what creates a position, what happens is then that groupthink kicks in. So if you take, for example, the Washington Post or the New York Times or even the Guardian, when they take a position on something, the other journalists and the other outlets will often come in and support that uncritically without thinking about the issues behind it. Which is why I believe that this book is as essential for students of journalism as well as lawyers and students of international relations and diplomacy, because the responsibility of accurate journalism that understands the legal context in which you are reporting is absolutely critical. And it is critical in order to dismantle some of the worst excesses that we have heard from our speakers today. But this is where I am more hopeful. And whilst lawfare is often wrongly, as we've heard, just seen as a South American issue, we are beginning to see journalists in some other jurisdictions taking their roles more seriously. I'll give you one example, which has been happening just recently. Lebanon, for example. Journalists are operating in Lebanon in very difficult circumstances. The journalists are reporting on the misuse of law by the Lebanese courts for political ends, involving both previous governments, but also the current interim government, as well as corporate entities. And those journalists in Lebanon are bravely covering, for example, the corporate lawfare of Lebanese banks, in where they're trying to hide behind the Lebanese courts when refusing their global customer base, for example, in Brazil, Australia, the United States, Canada, or indeed across Europe. And we are seeing corporate entities in Lebanon abusing the existing laws that are there in Lebanon to try and delegitimize and harm the rights of the general public, and in this case, the consumer, in attempts to intimidate and silence and to circumvent judgments and to curtail the right for an unbiased defense. But up against that are journalists who are prepared to fight against that and who are prepared to be brave enough and indeed quite often put, unfortunately, their lives on the line to to report fairly and accurately on these issues. And this is something that the Lawfare Institute also investigates. And it's something that we spend time on to ensure that where corporations are acting illegally around the world, using the tactics of lawfare, that we get an understanding of that. But it isn't, there's some questions coming in, is this just, are there issues in Europe on lawfare? But the answer is yes. I mean, you can make a case that some of the behavior of the UK government in relation to aspects of international law are highly questionable about the choice of jurisdiction and where they want cases to be heard. I'm currently in Mauritius, and the status of the Chagos Islands and the UK's behaviour against Mauritius and the UK's fight about cherry picking which disputes are put into international courts is also worrying. And it's something that we have to look at, and it's something that the Lawfare Institute looks at. So anyway, that is enough from me. I think we've got some further questions on media coming through. But if you don't mind, Valeska, I'm going to ask the first question that's come through, which is, are some legal jurisdictions more at risk to lawfare than others? Specifically, the question is, are jurisdictions based on French, German, or Spanish legal principles more susceptible to lawfare than those based on English common law? Valeska.
Thank you, John. We're talking about difference between civil and common law. So as Cristiano already said, the origins of this methodology is in common law. It comes from the United States. It comes through the negotiation of criminal law, basically through the plea bargain agreements, through non-prosecution agreements and deferred prosecution agreements. So the methodology, the strategy is to put so much pressure into executives or directors of companies or either politicians, anyone really, in order to have them literally confess, or simply confirm the hypothesis of the accusation without actually giving them the roots, actually the root for corruption. So this is already a misuse of the fight against corruption. So it comes from, as I've already said, the United States, which is basically common law. But what is happening now, it's not the misuse, this methodology is not being used formally. So we cannot say that it goes really through courts. It goes it happens in an informal manner, so that it doesn't really matter whether you're civil law or your common law. Of course, in Brazil, Brazil is a very specific place because it has, as already mentioned, some medieval laws. And we can point out the fact that the investigative judge actually is the judge, the sole judge without a jury, trying the merits of the case, deciding on the merits of the case. So this is obviously already goes to the heart of the unfair due process, which is no judge can be impartial in such a medieval legislation. So Brazil has its peculiarities, but in terms and more general terms, I would say that it happens more commonly in common law than in civil law, but it's being advanced. And it really now at this point, I would say that it really doesn't matter whether you're common or civil law, because it's all informal. It is all being negotiated, and it doesn't go through the official radar, the official channels. So it doesn't matter which law you're applying. It's all being done through Telegram, Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups, you name all kind of digital exchange of information, all kind of informal and therefore illegal exchange of evidences and information, and also through the recruiting of judges, prosecutors, everywhere in the world. So I would say that at this point, it's more of a unified manner and strategy than a civil versus common law aspect, one pro, one against con.
Well, you raise an interesting point there about the training of judges and lawyers. Just to loop back to the point about media, there is too evidence that some senior journalists are also invited to those similar sort of training programs as well, and indeed a wider civil society. So this does all point to a very sophisticated and well thought out program. You've already explained that from the United States. But is there any evidence of similar behaviour out of the UK or across Europe?
Yes, we would say that at this point it is a global problem. We can see the origin from the United States. I would say the UK is actually now we were just reading it over the weekend as one of the worst places for lawfare at this point. And they're continue on to Europe. It doesn't matter whether you're civil, common, it doesn't matter which system you're from. You will have trained prosecutors, you will have trained judges, and they will act and they will rule according to the FCPA and according to what they receive from the FISA informations, which is the Foreign Interceptation Act. So it is really a global problem that aims, it doesn't matter whether right, wrong, rich, poor, it doesn't matter who you are, you're a former president, a former leader, a president of the United States, from the UK, from France, it doesn't matter. It will, if this is used against you, it will come through the same manner, independently on what law, on what system of law the country we live in is. And that is what we have identified, mostly an uniform manner of acting around the globe.
Thank you, Valeska. And Jonathan, thank you for that question there that I put to the panel. Not everyone is supportive of the arguments that we're being made on the webinar here today. So I think it's only fair that we take some of the questions from people who are questioning that. The first point is, and I paraphrase, don't you think this case, the Lula case, is an example in itself of undermining the Brazilian independence of I think we mean the judiciary? Valesca, Cristiano, do you want to dive in on that? So don't you think this Lula's case is an example itself of undermining the independence of the judiciary?
Bom,
Chris, do you want to...
depois, se a Valesca e o Rafael quiserem complementar também, mas eu diria que o lawfare praticado aqui no Brasil colocou, sim, o sistema de justiça em xeque. Tanto é que nós tivemos a reação de alguns dos maiores juristas brasileiros e também estrangeiros, se dizendo perplexos com aquilo que estava acontecendo. No início da chamada Operação Lava Jato, ela tinha muitos apoiadores, porque, como você colocou, John, a mídia, ou uma parte significativa da mídia, ajudou a Lava Jato a construir uma imagem praticamente binária. Ou você era a favor da Lava Jato, ou você era a favor da corrupção. Então, quando você coloca isso para a sociedade, e essa é uma técnica muito sofisticada, você acaba elevando, né, agentes do sistema de justiça a um patamar incompatível, né, com o próprio sistema, com o próprio devido processo legal, porque o devido processo legal pressupõe paridade de armas entre as partes litigantes. E o que fizeram aqui foi tornar as versões, as hipóteses acusatórias, como se fossem verdade absoluta. Então, aquilo que era divulgado ou até mesmo vazado pelos promotores e juízes da Lava Jato foi considerado como uma verdade absoluta. No entanto, à medida que o tempo passou, nós conseguimos demonstrar que haviam muitas irregularidades, muitas ilegalidades, muita corrupção de conceitos jurídicos, dentre outros problemas. E isso desnudou, né, no final das contas, num grande problema para o nosso sistema de justiça, tanto é que nós tivemos recentemente alguns julgamentos muito relevantes realizados pela Suprema Corte que reconheceram duas teses que nós, desde o início, apresentamos, sendo uma delas a quebra da imparcialidade pelo principal juiz que conduziu a Lava Jato. Então, eu penso que houve, sim, esse problema, mas não é um problema criado pelo ex-presidente Lula ou por outras pessoas que foram atingidas. Ao contrário, é um problema daqueles que aceitaram praticar o lawfare, daqueles que foram treinados para praticar o lawfare e desprezaram a nossa Constituição, desprezaram os valores básicos da justiça.
If I may add to that, I think the concept of fair process is fair, independent, and impartial. So when you, during this case, we observed early on that the car wash operation put so much pressure in the judiciary itself. I'm talking about upper courts and tribunal and superior courts via media, that it goes to the heart and attacks the very core of what independence of the judiciary is. Later on, we had access to a file from held by the federal police and granted us accessed by the Supreme Court. And we were mind blown by the fact that the prosecutors, in collusion with judges and other, including journalists, they were planning the way to what they would call to emparedar, to put pressure on members of the judiciary, so they would uphold all of the decisions handed down by Judge Moro and then the appellate court in Porto Alegre and so forth. So I think that that attack on the independence of the judiciary should be fought. And what we've always been saying is that the car wash operation was actually one of the worst things that could ever possibly be done towards the judiciary in Brazil, against the judiciary in Brazil. The image of the judiciary in Brazil is actually now damaged because of said actions. And even the United Nations back in 2000, they were aware that when the population does not trust the judiciary, you cannot have a full democracy. So they created rules of behavior, either for judges, for prosecutors, when conducting cases, because they needed to pass on to the world population an idea of impartiality in the handling of justice, which was not happening then. And that was the attempt of the United Nations with the Bangalore rules. What happened now with the car wash operation is a total setback in that attempt to unify or to make strong democracy stronger through the trust of the population in the independence of the judiciary and in the impartiality of the judiciary.
Thank you, Valeska. I remember when we first started working together, the thing that you told me was, always remember, John, no one is above the law, but equally no one is beneath the law. And that has been one of the driving factors in all of the work that we have done on this. Now, I want to move now to Rafael and Alfredo, if they want to dive in on this specifically, to pick up a point. This has come from Ricardo at the University of Edinburgh, and it picks up on the point about the news media, but specifically about the Brazilian media. And Ricardo would like to know views on the news media regulation, and Bolsonaro's attacks on the free press are clearly dangerous, but equally dangerous are the abuses of press controlled by business elites who block any attempt to regulation and accountability mechanisms, with a misleading discourse or argument confusing regulation with censorship. So, Rafael, do you want to deal with the point about Brazilian media regulation and accountability?
Sim. Obrigado, João. Obrigado ao Ricardo também, que é pesquisador na Universidade de Edimburgo. Esse tema da regulação da mídia é um tema antigo, né, e que está, de certo modo, disciplinado na nossa Constituição, que a maioria sabe, pelo menos os que são brasileiros sabem, que é de 1988. Né? E toda e qualquer pretensão de regulação da mídia no Brasil é encarada, é interpretada como uma tentativa de censura. Né? Então, assim, as mínimas regulações, por exemplo, de propriedades, no que toca à propriedade dos meios de comunicação, a monopólios, oligopólios, são rechaçadas, são afastadas ou são duramente criticadas por essas grandes empresas de comunicação, e nós temos uma mídia completamente desregulada no Brasil. Né? É claro que agora nós vivemos, e até como resultado da Operação Lava Jato, nós temos um presidente de extrema-direita que faz ataques diários né, à imprensa. Então, a imprensa agora está sob ataque e é preciso reconhecer também que grande parte dessa fragilização da democracia que nós assistimos hoje no Brasil se deve também a um abuso dos meios de comunicação, né, que entre esses abusos nós podemos exatamente colocar o apoio de grande parte dos meios de comunicação, um apoio indiscriminado e um apoio, agora a gente já sabe, interessado à Operação Lava Jato, né, que é um projeto, a Operação Lava Jato é um projeto autoritário que se metamorfoseou, que se transformou num outro projeto autoritário, que resultou num outro projeto autoritário, que é exatamente o Bolsonaro. Então, é importante, se impõe, é um desafio para a democracia brasileira a regulação dos meios de comunicação e, sobretudo, uma regulação também que evite esse conluio entre o sistema de justiça e os meios de comunicação que nós identificamos na Operação Lava Jato.
Thank you, Rafael. Alfredo, I know part of your research and your King's is looking specifically at the Bolsonaro administration and where that is heading or perhaps not heading. Have you got anything to add on the media aspect?
During the period when the PT, the Workers' Party, was in power, under President Lula and his successor, Dilma Rousseff, the weakness of the parties of the opposition was very clear. And during this period, the Brazilian media took upon itself the role of the only legitimate, claimed to be the only legitimate channel of expression of alternative voices to the government. And eventually it claimed for itself the role of expression of the general will of the population. And speaking almost in unison, the TV channels in Brazil are virtually identical. The printed media is substantially the same. There are no alternative voices in the country. So it's not a simple issue to deal with this and to build a plurality of voices in the media so that different perspectives that you find in society can find a form of expression. And then you can have a proper debate between different perspectives on the country, different proposals for political action, different forms of economic policy, cultural policy, and other forms of collective action in Brazil. This is a major weakness of Brazilian democracy, the fact that the media has remained heavily concentrated and there is very little space for different voices to be expressed. When the media ganged up against President Lula and then later, much more strongly, against President Rousseff, it was extremely difficult to put any form of resistance because there were no channels for those alternative voices and those voices of resistance to be felt. The result has been this disaster that we see since Dilma Rousseff was overthrown in a coup d'etat. The result has been absolutely profound economic crisis, a social crisis, the disarticulation of the state, an economic paralysis that has never been seen in Brazilian modern history. It is an absolute disaster in the country that has culminated with the election of Jair Bolsonaro for the Brazilian presidency with mass support from the media, and then Jair Bolsonaro putting forward the program on which he was elected, a fascist program, becomes the president that leads the country into the abyss of the pandemic and genocide, effectively genocide, 500,000 dead in Brazil, probably undercounted. It is an absolute and complete disaster historically speaking, that could have been avoided. It could have been avoided. It was engineered, and this is the result that has been reaped. So it is extremely important to regulate the media and to build plurality so that we can stabilize democracy in the country and not see a repetition of this dramatically disgraceful experience that Brazil is going through at this point in time. It is a problem of rebuilding democracy on a more solid basis this time.
Thank you, Alfredo. Do keep your questions coming in. We've got about another 10 minutes to go or so on this session. I'd now like to just take some questions together, specifically on, there's some questions around what's next internationally and international cooperation. Cristiano, can I put a specific question to you, please? Do you think that the international cooperation in criminal matters between nations is an illegal instrument and the Convention of United Nations Against International Crime cannot be applied? That's a verbatim question.
John, essa é uma pergunta muito importante. Não, eu não sou contrário à cooperação internacional em matéria criminal. Ocorre que a cooperação internacional em matéria criminal, ela é disciplinada em acordos que são firmados entre países. Por exemplo, no Brasil, nós temos acordos entre o Brasil e Estados Unidos em matéria criminal. E esse acordo, que foi aprovado pelo Congresso americano e também pelo Congresso brasileiro, e tem força de lei, existe um procedimento que está descrito e que precisa ser seguido. As autoridades não podem deixar de seguir um procedimento que está estabelecido em um acordo firmado entre dois países. E é isso que nós vimos acontecer aqui no Brasil. Esses procedimentos que prevêem canais oficiais foram simplesmente deixados de lado em prol de uma relação informal que foi mantida entre procuradores e juízes com outros estados, notadamente com os Estados Unidos e com a Suíça. Então, não se trata aqui de condenar a cooperação internacional, mas que ela seja feita da forma correta, seguindo os procedimentos e permitindo, inclusive, a chamada sindicância dos atos que estão sendo praticados. É preciso que aquele que está sendo acusado possa saber qual foi a troca de correspondência entre a autoridade brasileira e a autoridade norte-americana, entre a autoridade brasileira e a autoridade suíça. Só que tudo isso aconteceu aqui no Brasil e acontece em muitos lugares do mundo de forma inoficiosa, fora dos canais oficiais. Então, isso é muito preocupante, porque isso acaba gerando não só a violação ao devido processo legal, mas também outros fenômenos que são altamente condenáveis, como fenômenos da porta giratória, fenômenos de uso, usurpação da função pública em prol de interesses privados, dentre outros problemas. Então, é isso, o Lawfare não é, de forma alguma, contrário ao combate à corrupção. Isso precisa ser muito sublinhado. O Lawfare é a favor do combate à corrupção, desde que ele não seja utilizado como uma arma de guerra para atingir alvos pré-definidos e pré-determinados e para destruir adversários e inimigos. Tudo depende da observância do devido processo legal. Então, essa é a linha do nosso pensamento e é isso que nós buscamos também deixar claro no livro e também nas nossas atividades no Lawfare Institute.
Thank you, Chris. Juliana, I hope that answers your question as well, which I've just seen has come through. But Valeska, can I just ask, with just a few minutes left, a quick question to you. What's the status with the United Nations and Lula's case?
We filed the first Brazilian citizen to file a communication of gross violations of human rights was President Lula. In 2016, when we saw a scenario in Brazil due to all of the dimensions and the violence of the misuse of these dimensions of lawfare being used in Brazil, we decided that it was time to go to an international court. Because we by then understood that there was no legal effective remedy to suspend or remedy the violences committed against him. So we filed this procedure back in 2016. By 2018, we obtained 2 injunctions, historical injunctions, granting President Lula his right to run for presidency, not only to run, but to vote as well. That was very important, and Brazil not only did not comply with it, it has not decided on the matter or even come forth before the United Nations to respond to those interim measures given by experts chosen by the court, by the committee. We have now come across in Brazil overwhelming evidences, and a lot of them, that what we had been saying back in 2016 was absolutely proven. What we are now going to take all of this evidence back to the United Nations so that it can actually make a ruling, a fast ruling, either by the end of the year or by the next year, by the beginning of next year. This procedure is a procedure that has been has thousands of pages. We have always communicated to the United Nations all movements, either in the judiciary or in the media in Brazil, in the attempt to convict Lula. And I think even though, in spite of all of these evidences, which we understand that the evidences are more than enough to convict Brazil in all of the allegations, which are Article 9, Article 14, 17, and 25 of the Pact of Civil Rights. We are going to take in more evidence so that there is no dispute as to the kind of violence and arbitrary actions that the Brazilian state perpetrated against President Lula.
Thank you, President. We're running out of time. So, Rafael, just very quickly, this may be the easiest one-word answer that you've ever had to give. Is there any positive side of lawfare?
Vamos lá, John. Como eu já disse, e como nós defendemos no livro, nos parece que o lawfare é sempre uma desnaturação, é sempre um desvirtuamento do direito. É sempre é uma forma de destruir o próprio direito, é uma contradição, na verdade, a gente falar que o direito se transforma numa arma, de modo que, como defendemos no livro e como defendemos todos os dias, o lawfare sempre terá essa acepção negativa, sempre será algo a ser combatido para que possamos salvar o próprio direito.
Thank you. There's some questions here, and I don't want to embarrass you, Cristiano or Valeska, and I'll probably answer them on your behalf. But in dealing with the lawfare cases, have you had to make personal sacrifices? And I think the answer to that, and I won't go into details, but some of the abuses against you, both as individual lawyers, but also as a family, have been really quite horrific. And I remember Jeffrey Robertson, QC, telling me how much he admired what you had done, not only for President Lula, but also for the people of Brazil, standing up for what is right and standing up for the rule of law. So perhaps this session today isn't the time to go into some of the abuses that you personally suffered, but I'm sure there will be a time in the future where it will become clear. And we're just over time now. So I just really want to wrap up and just say, actually a couple more questions. Lebanon, will the Lawfare Institute start an investigation into Lebanon? Yes, we'll look at, I think we'll look at that. I don't think we can go into the hypothetical questions about whether Lula is a candidate or not for the 2022 presidential elections in this session. But what we'll do, we've had loads of questions through. We'll try and come back to you directly for those, many of those that we haven't been able to get to. But before I hand back to Alfredo to wrap up, I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Lawfare Institute for President Lula, who kindly joined us earlier via his video, obviously Cristiano, Valeska, Raphael, to thank very much King's College London, and in particular the Department for International Development, for you, Alfredo, for the team, James and Ellie, translating teams. I know, thank you so much. I know how hard the translation is. You've done a great job for us today. Thank you very much for helping us put this event on. If you have any further questions on the book or indeed the Lawfare Institute, please do visit our website, thelawfareinstitute.com. Follow any of us on Twitter, where the conversation and debate will continue. The book is available in the UK via routledge.com, and indeed they will ship that internationally. But we do encourage you to buy the book via your independent bookseller. We obviously look forward to seeing everyone in person somewhere in the world when circumstances allow. But to close the event, could I now hand back to Alfredo in London?
Thank you, John, for chairing. Thank you to our translators, and thanks to our authors, Valeska, Cristiano, and Raphael. Just to say that your book is amazing. Your book is very important. And your personal courage and your devotion to justice, that they are absolutely admirable, and that must never be forgotten. You have made a difference to the course of history in Brazil. So thank you very much on behalf of King's College London for having this event with us. It has been an absolute honor and a privilege for the college. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending this session.